You know what's frustrating about managing security as an MSP? It's knowing that even after you've reviewed a system, firewall, or endpoint to make sure it's secure, it can still change the next day and you might never find out. Let me tell you, that sucks. That's why I want to tell you about LionGuard. See, some vendors talk about being a single pane of glass, but LionGuard actually delivers. They pull data from over 70 systems, use automation to detect changes, and alert you about the things that matter via a ticket in your PSA. If you truly want to secure your customers, visit msspalert.com/LionGuard. Check it out for yourself or sign up for a demo today.
Hey, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. Once again, I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media. In the first half of our show, we talked about how to organize your managed services taxonomy and excel in key categories, featuring Craig Robinson at IDC. But right now, I'd like to welcome back my co-host, Ryan Morris from Morris Management Partners, because it's time for us to examine our InfoSec news and trends topic of the day. Presenting our big idea, in security, the biggest zero trust architecture gaps you need to fill. Creating a zero trust architecture is a gradual process that starts with understanding precisely what you need to implement a never trust, always verify approach within your extended organization. Rather than materializing all at once, organizations often develop a ZTA in phases over time. However, during this maturation process, gaps in zero trust processes can form, creating potential weak spots. This session will look at some of the most common holes that develop in zero trust architectures and the steps that can be taken to close them. So let's get right to the heart of the matter, Ryan. First, for any organization, you have to define zero trust and what your approach to it is going to be. That's number one, really. I spoke with an expert recently who divided zero trust into core foundational technologies, nice to haves, and this isn't really a zero trust solution at all. And there's still, debate over some of this stuff. So for starters, if you were building a hierarchy of solutions and policies that you would need to have for a complete zero trust architecture, what's going to be at the top of your list, Ryan? What are your foundational technologies? What are enhancements that can wait until later? What are additions of less importance, or maybe doesn't even qualify as a zero trust, even if the vendor is saying, sure, we are?
See, I think we got our foundation, the very first step during our conversation with Craig in the first half of the show. He made the observation that no matter how cool your software is and no matter how advanced your perspective on architecture, design, and endpoint management, if you do not begin with an accurate assessment and an inventory of your assets, then there is literally no such thing as zero trust, right? It's one thing to create zero trust within the portion of the network and for the endpoints that we know and we control. But all of the skunk works, all of the external non-IT initiatives, all the subscription software applications, the local stores of data and critical customer information, that stuff is the opposite of zero trust, right? By definition, you have to begin with an assessment and an identification of all of your assets. Craig made the observation, there's not very many organizations that actually do that regularly, or that when they see what the total assessment of all of their assets is, that inventory doesn't surprise them. I actually agree with him, right? I have seen this in practice in the real world. We'll go in, we do an assessment, we run that inventory, we sniff all around the network, and we come back and say, okay, guys, here's everything that you have: infrastructure, network, endpoint, additional devices, and external services. Here's everything that you have. And usually the reaction is, we don't have that stuff. Like, that's not on our network. We don't have any of that. Yes, you do, and we found it. Now we need to be able to do something about it. I think that assessment, it was great advice from Craig. The next thing that I would say in terms of real practical beginning points is the idea of segmentation, or, to borrow the zero trust terminology, micro segmentation, right? Whenever we talk about this, it's, I grew up in a world of whitelisting versus blacklisting in terms of, access to external resources and users who would try to send us information. And in theory, it's a really easy thing, right? Rather than saying the whole wide world can communicate with me except for the bad guys that I have identified that I have included on my blacklist. You turn it around and you say, nobody in the whole wide world can communicate with me, send me an email, etc., except for the verified and approved people that I put on my whitelist. What we realized way back then was, nice theory, exactly the opposite of the reason why a business has technology, which is to be connected to and communicate with the outside world. So we realized it can't be like an on-off switch of, zero trust or all trust. What it has to do is begin with the idea of a network is not a monolithic thing. All of my data is not one great big store of information, and all of my users do not need or should not have equal access to the whole network, to all of the data, etc. It begins by saying, A, do you know what every single one of your assets are? And then B, can you micro segment those things down to a degree where you can give role-based access to those assets in a very prescriptive way? The problem with that, as we've heard it out there in implementation, is, again, nice theory, but you realize that I've already got a network, right? like I have already deployed mountains of technology. This stuff is everywhere out there, which is good, right? We've made investments, we've deployed systems, we can use them to run our businesses. And then to go back in and overlay a segmentation, there's a cutover process there where I can create the taxonomy and then apply it to the network, lock out everybody, and then readmit them based on their role-based access approvals. On paper, that sounds like step one, step two, step three. In the real world, getting organizations to pause for a second to apply micro-segmentation, that seems to be the biggest hamstring that we see in the zero trust approach.
Interesting. So that obviously gives us a little bit of a window in terms of what you would prioritize. And certainly organizations, as they look to assess and see what they have foundationally for zero trust and how they can go about meeting core objectives like a micro segmentation, it might be a little bit different for every organization depending on what you already have within your network architecture. Not everybody wants to start completely from scratch from zero. So there are going to be some organizations that are going to assess and see what they already have and how they can potentially build off of it. And so as organizations do that, let's look at where sometimes then holes and gaps can start to form. So let's zero in on that. Are there, you've said obviously being able to properly do segmentation is one of the first initial key challenges that can be difficult to achieve. Let's say now you've gotten past that initial first stage, and now you're really just trying to start to mature your ZTA and build it out, fully realize your vision. Where do the gaps tend to form first? Where do you see some holes in coverage? What are some of the common problems in that area for organizations and specifically MSSPs that you're personally seeing?
So I will find three areas that we usually see as gaps, right? What I'm hearing from the people, and again, by the way, I will begin with an editorial comment that I think a zero trust architecture is a step forward, right? I believe from a practitioner's point of view, this is a higher form of the art of cybersecurity, and it does give us a better sense of control than just, open the doors and try to play really aggressive defense against everything. So everything that I'm going to say here is within the context of this is a good idea. We should strive to get towards these kinds of capabilities. The gaps that I see fall into three areas. The first one is the fine tuning or the definition of roles, right? From an IT perspective, we tend to look at people in a hierarchical way in terms of you are a user, you are a manager, you are a super user, you are an admin, right? I will give you your limited sets based on your level in the hierarchy of the organization. But if we step across the aisle into the business side and we say, well, what does that person do? And therefore, what access do they need to network assets and information? The role definitions from the business perspective tend to be vertical, right? It's not a hierarchical thing, it's a functional thing. You are in marketing, I am in sales, somebody else is in finance. I think that the gap we see is the inability or the difficulty of merging those 2 points of view, creating a matrixed approach to role definition. What is your function and what is your hierarchy? If we could get there, I think we can start to give people very fine-grained definitions of what is appropriate access and what is not. Again, this is built on the assumption of micro-segmentation. If I can micro-define my roles and micro-segment my assets, then I can say, you in your role need access to assets A, B, and C. I need them to C, D, and E. We have different definitions based on who we are. That leads to the second gap, which is identity management, right? Like, I think identity management, every practitioner says, yep, that's a good idea. We all go back to Active Directory. We begin with, privileges and the way that we segment the access to our information. That's 30 years old in our industry, except, as you said, at the very top of mind segment of our program here today, we're not doing those fundamentals. And identity management is something that I think has layers of improvement that we've not yet fully consumed, right? It's a question of who are you, what is your profile, and what is an appropriate definition of your access to systems and resources. And then, do we have a robust MFA application in place, right? Not just do you know a password, but whether we want to go with a second device, whether we use biometrics, however we add layers to the factors of authentication. You can't do that without a really robust identity management protocol in place. So it begins with not defining the roles carefully enough and then not documenting those things in an identity management area. And then the third category is what I will call the ever expanding perimeter, right? If you think about it, if all I'm trying to protect is my servers, my data servers, my network switches, my endpoints, as in a workstation or a laptop that has direct access into my organization, that's complicated enough. And any organization that has hundreds of users and dozens of servers, you can already do the multiplication there and figure out the permutations that you might get into. But you and I have talked about it before. When we get into multiple operating systems, when we go beyond the traditional IT stack into the OT world and then the IoT world, I look at that and think, I can understand the burnout and the frustration with a practitioner who's trying to apply the principle of zero trust when every single morning they come in, sit down at their desk, and here's another list of dozens, hundreds, thousands of devices that are added. And now I need to find a way to recascade my privileges through those devices and those users. It can sound overwhelming. And so I understand why we haven't fully migrated to a zero trust architecture. Even if we all agree it's a good idea, these are things that we need to be able to get database type access to, right? Like, let's create a robust relational store of information of all of my assets, all of my humans, and what their appropriate functions are, which is attached to the identity. And then blossoming of all the devices out there in the world, this is not something you can handle in a legacy tool platform. It needs to have the modern ZTA architecture and tools applied to it.
Sure. And you started to allude to some of this, but I want to dive a little deeper into this next question, which is basically, can you lay out for us, for even those three areas that you just described as being some of the most common gaps, what are the main business reasons behind why these gaps form and are throwing up barriers to better ZTA maturity?
That's a good question, right? I would say that the first is financial, because it takes us time and people and money to be able to go out there and do this architectural approach. And there's a lot of people who just look at it and say, legacy systems are legacy and we're moving forward and we need to make this quarter's numbers. And they're not really thrilled about the idea of spending money on the past to recatalog and re-architect things. I get it, but boy, it is that technical debt, if you will, is something we have to pay off to modernize it and bring it into the world. I think the second business justification is what I will call the perception of privilege, and we see that all the time in business users who, for their job, need to have access to email and Word and maybe a couple of inventory or sales proposal type systems, and they could do their entire job on a Chromebook, and they just don't need all the latest and greatest. But that VP of sales out there who's like, I got to have the most powerful laptop. I need to have unfettered access to every system in the organization. The political perception of privilege, that is a problem that you're not going to solve with software. You have to address that with the individuals and then begin to impose that structure. Just very recently, I saw a headline that some of our brethren in the very big tech organizations, as they're striving to control budgets and cut costs and whatever, that they've announced that the next policy will be all users who are not in admin roles or need specific technical functionality, say for a CAD designer or something like that. Everybody else begins with a Chromebook, and then you earn your way up based on your role and what the functional access needs to be. That principle of least privilege, right? We say it in the world of zero trust all the time. Principle of least technical access, capability, functionality, cost. I think that's something that we need to embrace from an IT perspective. And you can't just go to the business side of the house and say, you're not important enough to get access to all this critical information. We don't trust you, because that's going to cause a lot of relationship issues, right? We can't go to them and approach it that way. But we do need to reset the expectations that, the average salesperson doesn't need a multi-core latest and greatest generation laptop with a GPU with all of this functional capability with just root level access to every drive inside the organization. That's a symptom of this monolithic approach to the network is the network and we will defend the perimeter. To do zero trust, you have to very micro segment internally and then say, I've got 100 subsegments. You get access to these 4 and only these 4 because that's what it takes to do your job. But do it in a way that makes it sound like it's going to make their world better and not an accusation of no trust, right? maybe I don't know about you. One of the problems with the idea of zero trust that I'm finding is technologically, that's the most accurate way to describe it, right? Like we get it from a functional point of view, but zero trust said to non-practitioners sounds like a character accusation, right? Like maybe we've not marketed this technology in the most efficient way. All the techies in the world go, yep, know exactly where you're going, no root drive access to anything. All the salespeople, marketing people, finance people, C-level execs in the world, they hear zero trust and they say, oh, how dare you? Maybe we should work on our
Yeah,
terminology.
that's true. Sometimes, names can make a big difference. Sometimes in terms of creating certain perceptions. But with all of that being said, before we wrap up, last question for you here. Fix everyone's problems, Ryan. What are your what are your top recommendations for? Okay, you've recognized these gaps; they exist. Now, how do you go about filling those gaps so that you really have like a complete end-to-end solution or as close to one as possible?
I agree with you. It sounds daunting, but this is a value proposition. If it was easy, somebody else would have already solved it. Here's a killer opportunity for service providers. I think we can fast forward some of the legacy architecture and systems and devices problems that we have if we can reorient our focus away from the pieces and onto the data, right? If we can legitimately say to people in finance need access to finance data, and people in sales do not need access to finance data, right? I think we can get rapid agreement around that conversation. And as we segment out the data resources that we have, if we can put our focus there, we can get some consensus, we can get people to buy in. And then when it comes to, okay, these pieces of architecture serve that data, you know what? The business people don't need to know how we make the sausage. What they need to understand is I need access to the following types of information. And anything that does not fit within there, I'm turning off. And then I can actually bring new role definitions in to expand or to kind of bring nuance to various roles within departments, et cetera. I think take the focus off of the device architecture and onto the data architecture. And I think we can eliminate a lot of the complexity that might cause some of the unintended consequences or the ripple effect of, turning off someone's access to a system that they really did need, but maybe we didn't understand their unique use case. I think shift your mind to a data-centric focus, and I think we can get much more rapid deployment of zero trust. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening to us on that conversation. Obviously, we have a lot to say there, but we don't have the definitive answer. What we would like to hear from you is, what are your thoughts? Obviously, you can send those to us via our email address at cyber4hire@cyberriskalliance.com. You can drop comments onto our show page, but let us know, right? That's our big idea in security. What do you guys think about it? We have a bunch of additional things coming up here in the show, some news headlines and some additional details to wrap up on. But first, we want to do a segment that we like to call Dear Cyber for Hire. This is our advice column segment where we get to play marriage counselor, if you will, between MSPs and their clients to help them mend fences if the relationship starts to go awry. Now, the following letter that we're going to read has been stylized and dramatized to protect the anonymous innocent out there in the world, but the conflict that's represented is very real. So, with that tee up, Bradley, where are we finding drama today?
We got a good one today, Ryan. Back with even more juicy MSSP melodrama as always. And this one comes from the client side of the relationship. So, guys, cue the music. Dear Cyber for Hire, everything's great. Seriously, I'm so happy with my MSSP partner's incident response services. This was very important to me when we first entered into our relationship. I really needed that. It filled a gaping hole in my life. Although, now that it has been filled, I am kind of noticing that, well, that's about all they do well. Did I say they were excellent at it? They really are. I mean, top of the line, no complaints, but I guess I was expecting a little more of a well-rounded relationship. Not to sound ungrateful, but it just seems like aside from incident response, all my other needs aren't being sufficiently met. I don't know, maybe I should have defined the boundaries of our relationship in the first place. I went all in on a full-fledged array of managed services, but I feel like I'm really just paying for mostly one great point solution. And again, wow, are they great at that? I mean, kudos to them for... Okay, stop. No more being mealy-mouthed about this. I want more out of this relationship, so how do I get it? Pointedly yours, vigorously vying for vendor variety and versatility in Vancouver. Ryan, it seems like this client may have entered into a very sweeping MSSP relationship with a one-trick pony. Perhaps the scope should have been limited to this one service in the first place, and they could have went elsewhere for other services. I'm wondering, do you keep trying to ride this one-trick pony? Do you dismount? Do you try to change the parameters of the relationship? Where do you go from here?
See, that's an excellent question. And this is a very big problem in our industry that is clearly illustrated by the IDC taxonomy of security services, managed services, and professional services that we talked about early on in today's episode with Craig. That is something that I think we need to get better at being. Let's not overpromise and underdeliver from a relationship perspective. Does your organization have extensive technical capability packaged in a deliverable way that can be engaged and consumed on a contract basis by your customers for each and every one of the boxes on that taxonomy? If I meet, by the way, when I meet somebody who can say, yep, we've got all of those things and we are latest, greatest, best in the world at all of those things, when I meet one, it will be the first one because, we're all specialists in our own right. We're left-handed or right-handed as an organization. We might be really good at incident response, but not so good at compliance management. We might be awesome at the architecture and design of a secure environment, but we might not be good at the human side of user management and training, et cetera, et cetera. Where are you good? Where are you not good? And then let's make sure we promise appropriate levels of expectations for our customers within those areas. Now, this is not isolated to the world of cybersecurity. In fact, as an industry, technology across the board, we're finally coming around to a principle that I've been banging a drum about for about 20 years. And it's been coined as the term of customer success, right? In the world of, I sold you some stuff, I kind of did some training and implementation, make sure that it was deployed correctly. And then I said, good luck with all that stuff. I'll check back when it's time to renew the license for your software. And I hope that you are okay. The industry began there. And then we evolved to fill that next level of technical gap because of who we are, right? Managed security service providers. When we realized that selling a tool and walking away wasn't good enough, let's sell you access to capabilities and then let's actually perform that function for you. That's the next step in the evolution of our industry. But the third level of maturity is where we don't just sell tools, we don't just deliver services, we manage the relationship to ensure that there is an accurate definition of the customer's perspective of success, like what do I expect and how will I measure that stuff, that we are able to track, report, and verify that we are achieving those definitions of success, and then that we can look ahead and not just say, well, you signed up for package A, and therefore I'm going to deliver package A every day, every night for the next 365 days, and that's all you're going to do. Well, no, let's start with one thing, and then you're a professional. You guys are cybersecurity experts. Look around. Like while you're providing package A service, what else did you notice? Are there other vulnerabilities? Are there other needs? Are there other business outcomes that aren't yet being addressed? The answer is yes, right? There's always more, but we can't just do a one size fits all and we can't just do one thing. It needs to be an incremental, agile approach to relationship management. What does the customer consider success? Can we verify that for them? And then are we looking ahead? I think that's the road forward to solve this problem. But, again, the hard light of day is if you ask the average MSSP, hey, are you guys a full service MSSP with a total portfolio of services? I would wager, 99% of them, maybe 99.5% of them would say, yes, absolutely. We do everything you need in security. But then you get under the hood and they do identity management and password protection and maybe a few patch updates. Be honest. Figure out where you are actually experts and sell that stuff. And then identify where you are not and either build it or buy it. Right? Go out and develop that capability so that you can incrementally expand and provide more value to your customers. Or go out and find a third party, a professional, a SOC administrator, a subscription type service that you can bolt on behind your face to that customer and cover things that you are not geniuses at. It's not a shame to say, I'm not perfect at everything. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. So do our cybersecurity portfolios. I think we need to stop saying, I am a cybersecurity solution provider and I can solve everything. No, you can't. And let's be honest, because later on, they're going to figure that out about you and go, wait a minute, you said you could do everything, but really, you're just doing this thing, and that's not enough anymore.
Yeah. Very, very sound advice, Ryan. As always, another relationship saved. Hopefully, our listeners have learned from this and don't make the same mistake. And remember, if you've been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or the provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might use your letter in a future episode. All right, well, as any security practitioner can tell you, there's no shortage of headlines filling up the cyber news feeds every single day. So we wanted to highlight a few items that we curated just for you. We present to you the security detail. Headline number 1 goes to you, Ryan. Just in time for tax season, IRS authorized site efile.com is found serving JS malware. Tell us more.
Yeah, as if tax season wasn't already enough fun. What we learned this week is that the website efile.com, right, not the IRS itself, not all of the providers where you can digitally file your tax returns, but this one has been infected. In fact, it was identified as a potential, there was a crash, an offline system, and an error that was then rectified, and they brought the system back up. A number of observers in the industry thought, hey, wait a minute, that kind of seems like the formula for your website getting hijacked. And a couple of weeks later, ta-da, it turns out that's exactly what happened, and they've been actively serving JavaScript malware down. Now, what we've learned from the researchers is it ain't exactly the most advanced or sophisticated malware, but it is a vulnerability. And this is something that reminds us as service providers, if you can protect the network, if you can protect the database, if you can protect the laptops, that's cool. But do you know what your customers are using all of those resources to do? And are they aware of third-party vulnerabilities that you can help them manage? Tax season is not a surprise. Happens every year in April, right? Everybody knows that this is what's happening. And in fact, as an organization, business taxes happen 4 times a year, right? You know that's going to happen. Let's collaborate with our customers and actually help them use resources that are verified and accurate and not going to introduce things that undo all the hard work that we've been doing for the other 11 months of the year. Headline number 2, Bradley, back to you. A breach of a law firm has exposed Uber data again. What do we need to know about this one?
Yes. Well, in keeping a little bit with your theme of tax season, the expression they always say, the only 2 certain things in life are death and taxes. Maybe they should amend that to the only things certain in life are death, taxes, and breaches, because breaches and cyber attacks are pretty inevitable also. In case in point, Uber data once more has become the target of a breach, the third time over a 6-month period. In this case, the malicious actors behind the act targeted not the transportation service itself, but rather its third-party law firm, Genova Burns. SC Media's Steve Zuria reports that Genova Burns has disclosed that files containing information such as rider names, social security numbers, and tax identification numbers were accessed between January 23rd and January 31st, though there is no known misuse of data at this time. Anyway, sometimes we forget that companies like law firms are third-party vendors too, and these types of mid-sized firms can be especially vulnerable at times because they don't always have the proper resources to invest in cybersecurity, which is ironic a bit because I realize, a law firm should know that a breach carries certain legal ramifications. Previously in December, Uber third-party partner Tectivity, an asset management and tracking services company, was also breached in an incident that exposed Uber employee email addresses, corporate reports, and IT asset information. One expert quoted in SC Media's most recent article suggested that companies just limit the damage that a third-party breach can do by enforcing the strictest possible level of access controls, following least privilege principles when dealing with your third parties. And that brings us to headline number 3 for you, Ryan. Western Digital, maker of storage hardware / disks / cloud services, discloses a network breach, another breach. See, it's inevitable, Ryan.
See, again, a good amendment to the inevitability construct there. This is A, alarming, B, encouraging. And the reason that I see both sides of this is that it indicates that as an industry and for those of us on the service provider side, as well as on the manufacturer side, it is becoming well known that software is not the only attack vector, right? There's plenty of systems-based resources applied to the side of all of our applications and our data and our network access protocols, et cetera. But hardware is also an attack vector. I remember, I will say from an experience that I had, I was hosting a panel discussion at an industry conference a couple of years ago. Big room, lots of people there, and it was in the storage industry, a place where, not the cutting edge necessarily of where all the VC is focused in our industry these days, but tremendous complexity and things that need to be figured out over there. After we had talked about, the ability to evolve with capacity and manage the supply chain complexities, I asked a question about cybersecurity. I said, you guys make disks and you guys make all of these data hardware and storage resources. What is your policy for cybersecurity at a product level? Crickets. Right, we're talking a room full of hundreds of people, and we got crickets back when I asked that question. It kind of apparently surprised the people on the panel, and basically the answer that they gave me back was, hey, we just make hard drives. We're not responsible for securing these things. Except that hard drives come with firmware, and hard drives come with admin consoles, and all of these resources are still accessible and need to be protected. Western Digital is not the first and unfortunately won't be the last hardware maker to suffer this kind of a breach, which had a direct effect of taking their MyCloud service offline for a while. But this stuff can proliferate through hardware as well. Everybody needs to make sure that we are including that in our assessment of assets as well. So broaden our perspective beyond just the software side of the world. Headline number 4, Bradley, proxy jacking is the new crypto jacking. What do we need to know?
Yeah, well, I think most of us are familiar with the concept of cryptojacking, whereby a malicious actor establishes a foothold into your systems and then silently commandeers some of your processing power to mine cryptocurrency. But less known, I think, is the concept of proxy jacking, where adversaries use their illicit access to sell their victims' internet bandwidth to legitimate proxyware services. Normally, through these services, computer owners can make a profit by providing any available unused bandwidth on their machines and mobile phones to outsiders, so that these outsiders are able to run certain applications that would otherwise be unavailable to them. Well, in a new report, researchers at SysDig have outlined a newly discovered campaign whereby adversaries are leveraging still unpatched instances of the Log4j vulnerability to gain initial access to victims before ultimately selling their IP address bandwidth to proxyware services for a profit. Proxyware abuse is actually really not totally new, but SysDig claims that the Log4j vulnerability, which quite frankly should be like 100% patched by now by everybody, there's no excuse anymore, hasn't been previously exploited for this particular purpose. So in that sense, kind of new. The victimized infrastructure in this case was a Kubernetes container, specifically an unpatched Apache Solar service. As noted in an SC Media report by Stephen Weigard, SysDig reports that deploying proxyware via Log4j could score attackers more than $220,000 in profits a month, though a more modest compromise of 100 IPs would produce more like almost 1,000 per month. So bottom line, patch your Log4j vulnerability, for goodness sake. Also, if you're actually thinking of using one of these proxy jacking services legitimately, be careful, as you're essentially allowing strangers to do who knows what with your IP address. And just be aware of this strange little cousin of crypto jacking in general as another potential threat. And so this brings us finally to, drumroll please, our irrelevant news item of the week. Now, this is a real news pitch that Ryan or I have received in our inboxes for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to us. But we'll see if somehow we can maybe make it about cybersecurity. Sometimes we can. So are you ready, Ryan?
I am ready. Let's bring it.
All right. Well, as I've mentioned before, I do get a lot of video game content type pitches. So first, starting with a little bit of a bonus one, I got something on a new survey revealing which Super Mario character is the all-time most beloved, obviously timed for the new movie that's out. So just as a quick aside, do you have a guess on this, Ryan, who the most beloved Super Mario character is?
Well, I mean, if it's not Mario, then maybe they're not doing it right.
You would think it would be Mario, right? It'd be pretty obvious, but actually it's Yoshi, the dinosaur, that actually came up as number one, and then brother Luigi actually number two. Mario was third. So a little small victory there for Luigi, who's always playing in Mario's shadow. But that was really more of the bonus one. This is the one that I enjoyed even more. This is our main irrelevant news item of the week. Apparently, new research has revealed that Texas as being America's rage quitting capital. So basically Texan gamers are the most likely to rage quit their video games and destroy their controllers in the process, potentially throwing it against a wall. Now, the study by online casino expert DatSlots analyzed Google data on searches for various controllers to see where new devices were highest in demand and therefore where the rage quitting might be happening the most. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly the most sound research methodology there, just like looking up, requests for new controllers. Maybe there's just a lot of people wanting to play games. But as it turns out, Texas topped the list. And following that, second was Nevada, followed by Illinois, Georgia, and California. You will be happy to know, as a part-time resident there, Ryan, that Hawaii placed at the very bottom of the list, perhaps because everybody is just so chill there, or maybe there's just better things to do than play video games, like, go outside. So my question to you, Ryan, is, have you ever known anyone to rage quit the game of cybersecurity? Basically just walk out, hey, this is too much for me. I can't take it anymore. I quit.
See, as a person I will say, I play video games not as much as a gamer would, but much more than a civilian would, right? Like I would put myself in that category in between of, I have spent money on those systems. I have invested chunks of my life into games, and especially the sports games that I enjoy playing. I will confess in front of all of you that I have rage quit a game before, but I've never destroyed a piece of equipment in the process. Okay. That said, when you draw it over here to the professional side of things, we talk about burnout, we talk about overwork, the kind of built-in ending of negative outcomes that we deal with in our industry. I have seen this, not just heard of it from like clients who say, hey, yeah, we had a guy quit and it wasn't really cool. I've heard that a lot of times. I have physically seen it multiple times. And I think it gets to the level of this is a big deal that we need to pay attention to in our industry. You and I've talked on this program before extensively about how do we embrace the human, give them, a rewarding environment, not an overwhelming workload. Let's give them diversions and other things to do that can moderate that level of, just overwhelming burnout. That's not just a sideline. That's not just something we need to consider once we get through this one particular busy season. When things calm down, then, we'll figure it out. Because, by the way, this busy season never ends in cybersecurity, right? Rage quitting in our industry is a thing. And A, that's not cool for anybody in a working environment. But B, that creates tremendous disruption in the continuity of our service capabilities. When people just toss their keyboard into the sky or slam it onto the table and walk out with a string of expletives, I will say, and this is the thing that I think we take away from this conversation, if any among us have not actually felt that need at least at one point in their career, but then suppressed it and moved on and tried to act like a grown-up, right? If you've never felt that like, I gotta go, then I would invite you to play more video games so that you can learn what that feels like inside. It's a real thing. First time I ever saw somebody sitting on a couch next to me destroy their controller, I was like, that's $150. What the hell? Why would you do that? And yet you realize that's not them doing something that is strange or outside the human experience. That's something all of us feel. And the more we get burnout in our industry, the more people are going to express it.
Sure. Feeling that way normal, acting out on it, that can be pretty unhealthy. From a video game perspective, I think it's very normal to rage quit. Less normal is slamming your computer against the wall or doing the double whammy of destroying your TV by throwing the controller into the TV. I remember when like Wii especially first came out. Do you remember the stories of people who would be playing Wii bowling or one of those games?
Oh, yeah.
And they'd forget and they would basically throw their controllers, if it was the ball, if they didn't have it strapped onto their hand,
Absolutely.
and it would go flying into the TV and breaking. So yeah, but I mean, we've all rage quit games, but I'm glad to hear that you've never destroyed a piece of video game equipment, nor have I.
I'm a little bit of a cheapskate like that. When I finally get my hands on that new system that I've been waiting too long to get, once that thing finally showed up in my house, people have to stand back. There's a glowing light around it a little bit, and we'll speak softly around that treasured equipment because it is the gateway to a lot of good stuff.
Yes, for sure, Ryan. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are going to have to quit this discussion now, but not in a rage-filled sort of way. Just a normal. We gotta go because the time is out. But the time is up. But listen, we're gonna be back again next week. So don't worry, episode number 17, just a week away. But in the meantime, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth.
And I am Ryan Morris. And please reach out to us with your comments, your feedback, and your ideas about the business of cybersecurity. And we will do our best to keep that conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.